And then they all circled us and were like predominantly women, and then Beko Baba, and there was another young man. And this man came and stood right in front of me and snave and bayacula, and I got so angry at their presence, at their audacity. Why are they circling us? And then I felt unsafe.
I don't remember the exact day, but I know that it was somewhere in the mid to late 80s. It was summer, I know that, but maybe that's because it's always summer in the memories of my childhood. So, at our house, we owned one of the very few television sets in the whole street. It was this tiny 32 centimeter black and white TV with beige sides and those two black knobs that went g as you tried to turn the channel. It would have been one of those evenings where I would have already been bathed and I smelled like camphor cream mixed with Vaseline. And people from our neighborhood would have come by to watch TV, so our dining room was packed, and me and my friends would be jostling to find the best position to watch the television from underneath our mahogany dining room table, which would nearly take up the entire dining room. The grown-ups would be sitting on chairs, drinking tea, and we would be sprawled out on the floor, muffling our giggles. Otherwise, if my father got annoyed, everyone is going home. On this particular day, we were watching something that would become the most iconic TV show to ever come out of this country. As Margaret Singana started singing the theme song, "We Are Growing," we all got goosebumps, lumpier than a pubescent teenager's acne-ridden forehead. We were giddy with excitement as we watched an army of warriors storm across the screen, and the words Shaka Zulu appeared and ushered us into an unforgettable era of South African entertainment. The Shaka Zulu TV show was a moment in time for us back then, mostly because it did not show black people as extras in a white narrative. Henry Cele's chiseled physique and his shiny 8-pack became the embodiment of African power and pride. Sure, the story, although inspired by historical events, was written by white writers, and it was riddled with inaccuracies, gross exaggerations, and a dodgy plot, but back then we were willing to take anything that helped us, even momentarily, to forget about the crushing weight of the apartheid regime that we were living under. It was somewhere in the first episode that another scene occurred that got carved into the deepest parts of our collective psyche. It was this scene when Shaka Zulu's mother, Nandi, was to be told of the prophecy concerning her yet unborn son. The scenery suddenly shifts from the bright African sun to a dimly lit forest with unnatural mist crawling along the ground. There were distant groans of thunder and eerie music that had us afraid to even let a breath out of our tiny lungs. Then you heard the bone-chilling shrieks of a pack of hyenas that you could barely see on the tiny screen. A brilliant flash of light carved out a solitary figure standing in the middle of the forest. Pure white eyes with no pupils cut through the blackness of the forest. Skin like old leather and hair that was so mangy that it could only come from a corpse. Two deflated breasts hung flaccidly on the uncovered chest as the only indication that this person was an elderly woman. She was draped in what looked like a coat made of animal hide, but in the darkness it looked like the coat grew out of her body. In a grave and unnerving voice, she tells Nandi that, "From your womb shall come a king,
giving birth to a mighty nation of blood-stained spears.
We would later learn that this was Sitai, a fictional character who in the story was a well-renowned and wholly feared witch doctor. Up until this very moment, we had never seen any form of spiritually gifted person on South African television. Heck, at the time, most of us didn't even understand English. But we didn't need English to understand what we were seeing and what was being communicated. In a very fundamental way, this was the very first mainstream portrayal of a Sangoma on South African TV, and it frightened us to the core of our beings. That moment gave face to all that the West feared most about African spirituality, and that fear got pumped into our collective subconscious as Black people. Whatever uncertainties you had about anything related to any of our mystical practices would inevitably flash in your mind Sitai's piercing zombie eyes and the eerie laughter of those damned hyenas. A lot has changed in our country since the late 80s. But what has not changed all that much is the place of the Black woman as the lowest rung of our socio-economic ladder. The scene in Shaka Zulu when Sitai appeared for the very first time did not create the antagonistic atmosphere towards Black women within spirituality, but it did epitomize it. It brought into the mainstream media not only that African spirituality was something frightening, but it gave the dark side of African spirituality the face and the voice of a Black woman. In the resurgence of African spirituality in recent times, with a lot of people, especially young Black women, going through the process of ukuthwasa, many of them have had to shoulder the weight of suspicion and mistrust that essentially have their roots in the belief that all women spiritualists are witches. But in recent years, with the exception of maybe the pandemic, one of the most powerful and divisive topics that have occurred worldwide has been the feminist movement. What precisely feminism has achieved or not achieved is extremely debatable, but what is profoundly clear is that we have felt its presence. I know that spirituality is probably not a battleground that feminism has consciously chosen, but a lot of what we believe about spirituality is still rooted in cultural and traditional beliefs that feminism has been actively fighting against. So, in this episode, what I would like to know is what happens when feminism meets spirituality. More specifically, what happens when a person who is a feminist has to go through intwaso. For this conversation, I spoke to Ugogo Gcinashe, some of you may know as Vangile Ganjo, who is a prolific writer, a poet, a publisher, and an astute scholar. Or views that we have to think about before we verbalize, So feminism has shifted society in a very real way, right? Maybe not necessarily in ways that are making a tangible difference in women's life, but there is a crack, right? So I was wondering then, when it comes to spirituality, has feminism also challenged that? Because feminism has been trying to dismantle the status quo as it is. So I was wondering that then when those who are part of the feminist movement, when they come then across issues of spirituality, then what happens? Because there things are a bit less tangible. The structure that you're fighting is not necessarily man-made. There are aspects of it that are, and there are aspects of it that are not. And most of the time it's difficult to differentiate what is actually man-made and what is not, and what do you challenge and what do you not challenge. Almost like what is ordained by God and what is ordained by man, and how do you differentiate that. So I want to hear basically from your personal experiences, like, do you remember when you first came across either the phrase or the idea of feminism, like as early as back as you can remember?
So I feel like you've said quite a lot.
Yes.
And I want to answer that question, but I do want to backtrack a little bit because there's something you said that I don't know if I agree with. When you say that that kind of feminism has shifted society a bit, I don't know if I agree. I think what feminism has done is it's shifted the spotlight onto where the power dynamics are.
Isn't that shifting society?
No. It's just highlighted it.
Okay.
People haven't changed their attitudes. People have become more cautious because they're afraid of being dragged, not necessarily because their attitudes have changed. People are saying what they feel like that is the right thing to say in front of the microphone or when they're in front of women. And then behind closed doors or when they're sitting with their friends, then their true colors come out. And so that's even worse, I think.
Really?
Because I, for one, would rather know where my enemy lies. And I'm not even trying to make it sound like enemy and what. But there's a fear of being cancelled and a fear of being called out rather than a fear of being humane or of being inhumane or a fear of really addressing what it is that is being said, which makes me believe that at the heart of it, people still aren't listening.
It's for sure.
People still aren't registering ukuba kuthiwani kanye kanye xa kuthethwa ngale feminism okanye kuthiwani kanye kanye xa kuthethwa ngale Me Too. When men are still asking themselves uba I don't understand why so and so, why we have to cancel R. Kelly. His music is good. Yes, we don't agree with what he's done, but his music is good. And his music has been such a huge soundtrack of our lives. And in fact, R. Kelly is the perfect example because how he tears society up is exactly how the ideas around feminism tear society up. There is a sentimental nostalgia on the power that this patriarchal society has given men. And no one wants to let go of that power and the way things are. And so you mean to tell me that now, just because we had sex and we were both drunk, ndimrapile? Except you knew that your intention was that you wanted to get her drunk to have sex with her. You knew you weren't going to have sex with her when she was sober. And so there's a power dynamic there. Something has shifted. And you're not understanding that, or your refusal to see that is what is dangerous. And so what I'm saying is everything is becoming veiled. Instead of saying, I can see what I'm doing wrong, or I can see if there is an issue, we're saying, I don't want to be cancelled, so I'd rather not say anything. Okanye, I'll wrap it up in these fancy words that I hardly understand. But I don't know if things have changed.
Maybe it's a situation of we are looking at possibly too short a term, and that some things take longer to change.
Maybe, but I don't know. Hey, I'm not convinced. I'm not convinced if I see it as Lalini, Elokshini, in the suburbs, sitting and interacting with people one-on-one, old and young. I'm not sure, hey. When people have let their guard down and they are not afraid of being cancelled, when they are not feeling like you are threatening them, or you're going to be argumentative, you hear what people really think.
I think what you're saying is, for me, what it's leading me towards what I'm hoping that we're going to get into, in that, are we aware of what these views translate into spiritually, right? What do patriarchal views or even feminist views translate into spiritually? You know, what do these things mean for our spiritual selves and how we relate to ourselves and the spiritual world and to each other? So yeah.
Okay, so let me think about this. When first did I hear the term kind of feminist? I think I was probably in high school. My English teacher, Mrs. Felton, she was probably like
those liberal white women.
Yes, with the walls that had all these quotes and you can do anything you want, and also it was my first encounter in an all-girls school. So this is the first time I heard the English term feminism. If I were to now, in hindsight, think of the first feminists I knew, I would think of Usno Welile, Elalini, who had 12 children by 12 different, well, not 12 actually, 8 different men, I think. And I'm not saying she was a feminist because she had 12 children with 8 different men. She was a feminist because she defined her life according to what she wanted to define her life as. And there was something really powerful about watching how she moved through the world, how she cared for her children and provided for them, how she got drunk freely and heard people talk but didn't care. In fact, like, she would laugh it off in a way like, oh no, I know what you're going to say. Oh, abaya, oh, babis babalana no tata bantwana bam. Kani hoyeni ndaba zenu. Do you understand? There was something really powerful about that. There was also something powerful about Umakhulu Nomadu, who would tell you that, I mean, she passed away at the age of 80. And she would not let a moment pass without reminding you of how beautiful she was, and that and she understood the currency of beauty, and she understood the currency of making your own decisions. And I think about Magazu Zanele, and all these women, for whatever reason, were on the outskirts of respectability and acceptance, and a lot of them ended up being really drunk most of the time.
I don't know how to take that.
I think understanding it now is because they were troubled by the weight of not being able to, because it's lonely to to define your life for yourself. Is a very lonely road. And I don't think everyone can carry that weight. So I'm not praising how they handled the loneliness, but I am saying that they paved way for certain things to be possible for certain young women, even if we didn't have to follow route in how this, like, we didn't have to follow route in the weight of the decisions, but there was way, like, as in, it was okay to live by yourself because naba bantu who have done it before. It was okay to get married as many times as you want if you wanted to, because there was an example of that, and you got to decide for yourself which of the consequences of certain things, or which of the burdens or the weight of certain things you were willing to take, and which ones you could avoid for yourself, so they opened the spectrum of thinking and the spectrum of possibility for young girls like me, especially for young girls like me who didn't fit in our families. So I found community in other women who didn't fit in, but who led, and you see, the thing is, like, now I would say, oh yeah, I could judge them however I want. They were happy though, or at least they seemed like they were happy. Umakhulu Nomadu led a very long life in which she would say, ba you, hi, mna ndibone abantwana bami besenza le nale, ndibone abazukulu bami besenza le nale, hayi noba uThixo ngandithatha mna andinandaba,
okay.
And so that's really something special.
And at the time, in, I suppose, your late high school years there, what did all of these things mean to you? What did they translate into your life at that time?
I mean, I have to admit that I didn't draw the connection between Omakulu Nomadu and Mrs. Felton until probably within the last decade.
Did it seem like a white women thing? Feminism?
Yes. Yes, definitely. It was all in English. Feminism existed in English.
Yes.
Because what is feminism ngesixhosa? And I mean, what is feminism ngesixhosa? I still can't tell you if I know what the word is, but I do understand that if ungumfazi uyazilawula okanye uyakwazi uziphilela ubomi bakho uzikhethele
which in that very phrase ba uyazilawula also already has a connotation to it, that you it's not even that you do what you want, but you don't listen.
Of course.
And meaning that you don't listen as in you are disrespectful.
Of course. But I mean, if there is an entire system that is built to keep you inside the system, the minute you start coloring outside the lines, there's laulamas.
True. You said something which is leading to my next question about feminism and English. Feminism, for me, the one thing that always struck me about it is that it seemed very academic. It's very wordy. There's lots of phrases and terms. Like why is it so word heavy?
So the thing about feminism is that it cuts across all sectors of society. So in essence, if you talk about Pan-Africanism, you know that you're talking about Black people across the world. So there are many things that can separate us, but in essence, we're all Black and we have a shared experience of oppression based on us being Black. Feminism cuts across all sections of society because it aims to serve humanity rather than just women. Because it says that in a patriarchal system, I cannot think for myself, actualize for myself, own my own body. And this affects me if I am straight, if I am binary, if I am heterosexual, if I am homosexual, if I am trans, if I am Black, if I am white, if I am Latina. And so because it cuts across so many fields or realms of living, now that it is being studied as an actual thing that needs to be not just known and understood or seen, but as something that has to be legislated, and a system that there needs to be a feminist way of life, a feminist system that has to be created, or the creation of a feminist world. And so because we understand creation through cognitive building and academia, so how do we language it so that we can understand it, so that we can create it? And so you have people from across the world, across different sectors of living, who are all experiencing some version of being hurt and broken by toxic masculinity. And so I think that's why it becomes academic and wordy and that's not even that's the experience that we experience because we are in the spaces of ukuthetha, like ukumsha. If ndiya ezilalini and we talk about feminism, we're not going to use the words feminism, but someone is going to say, yo, andidikwe uba xa ndifuneka ndiyokwenza izinto zamagqirha funeka ndicele kumyeni wam uba ndingahamba and aka-understand and uzawuthi yena uzawuphekelwa ngubani ntontontontonton. And you start seeing how these women are saying, I want to be able to decide for myself what I want to do with my body and with my life. And so without the language, the academic language, they're still seeking a feminist way of living. And so I think that it becomes kind of verbose because we live in a verbose society and everyone who has a microphone has some kind of access to.
I think you just actually helped me link it to how many in whether be it in South Africa or in America with the civil rights movement and us with the struggle, that a lot of the most prominent people are writers.
Yeah.
And not necessarily like novelists, creative writers, but or Steve Biko, like these were Osobukwe, they were writers. They were
trying to explain the world.
They were trying to synthesize human experiences into books so that people could relate to them who are not experiencing those things. So I suppose that it does need a deeper command of a language to be able to express complex issues in a way that it doesn't seem frivolous. And I suppose because a lot of the time with those people, they were in a way appealing to the Western world. And when you're appealing to the Western world, you kind of have to prove something to them that then you're not an animal, you're not stupid, you actually know what it is that you're talking about. I literally just made that connection because there are because in such contexts words then are necessary so that they can convey complexities, even though then interpretation becomes an issue because what does this mean, what does that mean, and who coined phrases and who didn't. And in the whole process of the language being feminism being wordy, I don't know at which point it happened, but feminism and its academic language then found poetry. And what I've always found very interesting is that you can have feminism and you can sort of debate, feminism, there's white feminism, that kind of feminism. But once you engage with poetry around feminism, it is distinctly black. Like, I don't know of a white feminist who has gravity in terms of language, who can be quoted, whose words can be printed on a t-shirt. Like, how did that happen? Because it gave feminism such a powerful yet even alluring voice.
So there are plenty of white women feminists who have beautiful poetic voices, from Adrienne Rich to what's this woman who has the book called Mercury? Ariana, I forgot her surname. But anyway, there are plenty. But I'm not here to make an argument for white women. That's not my work. But I will tell you what black women have always had to do is protest, is to fight, is to be heard, is to make sure that their agenda is not forgotten or that they are not lost to the voices of white women or lost to the voices of black men. And because of that, there is a craft and a skill with which black women have had to ascend to in order to make their words prominent. And it is a testament to the black women's rights movements that you can say what you say. It's because Black women fought really hard to make sure that their voices get heard. Because that hasn't always been the case. And poetry is beautiful in that for a long time, when we thought of poetry, we thought of dead white men. Or we thought of, the Shakespeares and the Robert Frosts and the, even the Rudyard Kiplings. But it wasn't always that we thought of anyone else. And then when we thought of, then maybe we started thinking about the Sylvia Plaths. But there was something about the way in which that specific kind of poetry hid emotions in trees and flowers and sand and landscape. And then Black women were like, Nashama, this is about trees. I'm talking about blood and bone and heart and my eyes and my hair and having to move through this world with my vagina and my heart. And so all of a sudden, you were cutting straight to the bone of the emotions. And so when poetry works and is most successful, it is moving, it stirs the emotions because it finds ways of singing in words and in image what you cannot ordinarily articulate. And so Black women were, I'm not trying to hide what I'm feeling in landscape. We're creating portraits with words here. We're creating moving images with words here. So Sonia Sanchez is understanding that we are musical people. We are rhythmic. And with music, I can fight things. Audre Lorde is saying, I can write all of these things, but here is a litany for survival because we were never meant to stay. We were never meant to make it. Maya Angelou is saying, I'm a woman phenomenally. And you understand that. I'm not talking about mushrooms where we have to debate, is she talking about plant? I remember in high school, we debated the poem Mushrooms by Sylvia Plath, and someone said it was about population. And I was like, what? What? Where? How? But you don't have to do that with a litany for survival. And then there are many other styles that have evolved, but at the heart of it is always, here is my heart, here is my blood, and here is the music.
Sure. When did feminism, I don't even know how to word this properly. At some point, feminism and queerness merged, and I don't know which one came first, because our current understanding is that we almost feel that, or rather, from my perspective, I almost feel as if it's one and the same thing, and I don't know if that was the intention or is that what it evolved to, because when we started hearing about feminism, it always had the image of the white woman with short hair and a lesbian and a butch lesbian at that. How did that happen? How did feminism then gain a presence within the queer community, or become the queer community even?
There's a quote, and I wish I could remember who it was by or how it goes verbatim, but it pretty much says that if you want to create the best kind of liberation movement, you have to take those who are at the very outmost of the margins and bring them in. And by virtue of doing that, you will bring everyone else in. And if we look at how oppression works, sexual orientation is one of the biggest tools with which toxic masculinity has been able to kind of kill people, very literally. And so I would think that it was always meant to have queerness at heart. Without the LGBT plus community, we can't talk about an inclusive feminism. And so if that has to be the face of feminism, then so be it. Because if the black and I know that if the black trans woman is included and is the face, then I, by virtue of being a black cis woman, am included. And so by being a black queer, a white queer woman is included. And do you understand? Like, as in, because now you've taken someone who is probably going to get hit the hardest.
Like further down the rung. Yeah.
Who's going to get hit hardest by this type of oppression. And you've put them at the top. And not at the top, like you've put them at the forefront to say, we want you to be free. How do you self-actualize? Because if you can self-actualize, I can self-actualize. So I don't know if I do know that it would have been smart to make that be the design.
If you could design it.
Yes.
That's okay. Because what I kept thinking over and over about it was, when you say it took people from the periphery in, you realize that in a way, even from its roots, let's say, and I don't want to say that the roots of the feminist movement as we know it are white, but queer lesbian women were lower down than your cis women, and they're the ones who had to fight within they had the capacity to fight the white system for themselves, even though they were fighting for themselves necessarily. But in challenging the status quo, I suppose everyone else realized that, God does bleed. We can actually fight this situation.
So also we must be very clear in understanding that white women may have popularized the feminist movements, but they didn't start them.
Yeah.
It's like when Fees Must Fall, when the papers jumped on board was when the white kids were the shields.
When they were the shield around the black students.
Shields. Yeah. So we must understand the way this system or structure will work. And so even within, exactly as you're saying, within white women, it was the white lesbians or the white butch lesbians who were most at risk and had to fight hardest to make sure that, in all of this, they come out safe as well. But feminism, yeah.
I'll tell you why I actually specified the women butch lesbians, and it's sort of bringing us then into the topic of spirituality, in that for one thing, there is the reality of spiritual entities seemingly having a kind of agenda, right? Kona omkhulu, so and so, kona ogogo, so and so, and I mean this in spiritual sense, not as in healers, and how then these entities would work with people across, or rather, they wouldn't work with same genders. You'll have a woman who has umkhulu, or who would be called umkhulu. You'd have a man who would be called ugogo. And for me, I've always wondered if that has any influence. That do butch lesbians necessarily have male guiding spirits, if I can put it that way. Or rather, whether we call it spirit or we call it energy, I don't know, but that's always been my assumption. Is that necessarily true?
So, here are two things. The first is that we like to compartmentalize things so that we can understand them better and perhaps we can process them better. So when we compartmentalize masculine energy, we must put it in a male presenting body in order for us to understand it. So the assumption is that to be masculine, you must be male. And to be feminine, you must be female.
Yes.
Except masculinity and femininity are energies, not gender. And so masculinity can live in any gender. Femininity can live in any gender. And in fact, all human beings are both masculine and feminine. And depending on the kind of human being that you are, will depend on whether or not you are predominantly masculine or predominantly feminine, and how you live on the scale. And most of us vacillate from deeply feminine today to calling on deeply masculine in other areas of life, because we understand how these are energies that are also tools that can be used in how we live our lives. That's the one thing. The other thing is that you can have a guiding spirit that was a deeply masculine woman or a deeply masculine man. And if that is your primary guiding spirit, you will take on some of those characteristics. So you can find that, like, I'll give you an example with Mna. My primary guiding spirits have always been women. And even the women who are my primary guiding spirits, two of them are deeply feminine. The other one is both kind of like she vacillates between the feminine and the masculine. And I find ukhoko wam, who is a man and who now pulls also from this energy, who moves between the masculine and the feminine. And so this is how, for me, healing is finding the balance between the feminine and the masculine. And all of this is a long-winded way of saying that by virtue of being human, you can be both masculine and feminine. And then when you add the spiritual component, it can take the energy you walk with and that you are, and it can be either amplified or at loggerheads or like newly combusted into something that will then be how you present.
Sometimes I hear, healers or people who have abantu abadala talk about doing things that are not necessarily them, right? Some people will, sniff, for example. Some people do that, some people don't. Some people drink, and not necessarily excessively, but or rather they would drink something that they don't normally drink, like someone who indulges in wine wants a black label once in a while, or cigarettes. I had a friend who had to smoke a cigarette now and then. Do these physical manifestations or characteristics ever translate into thoughts? As in, do you ever then adopt the thoughts of your guiding spirit? And what I'm leading to is that, is it possible for a person to be a feminist based on their guiding spirit and that particular guiding spirit, particular personality? Is that something that can happen?
I mean, so the whole point of uktwasa is to be able to find peace and harmony with your guiding spirits, so that you are not living in constant possession, so that I'm not walking around constantly possessed. I understand that that will happen, and that happens, that's part of life. But I must be able to have a way that I can negotiate life with abantu badala, because I live in the body of Uvangile and I have to live in this world. And so ukutwasa is to then understand, when this is happening, when I'm thinking like this, feeling like this, behaving like this is who is coming through. Is it in line with who I am? Sometimes you'll find it is. Sometimes it's not. Uktwasa is to find harmony between these things so that there isn't that conflict. So, for example, if you have like umkhulu, you can stop having these cysts and miscarriages and things. Ahlale kakuhle emzimbeni wakho, so that akalwi nomzimba wakho. Do you understand? And so I want to say, yes, you could spiritually inherit feminism. But I think if we are twasa, and if we twasa kakuhle, you can decide for yourself if you are a feminist, and understand that ugogo wam was a feminist. Now I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm. So then you are a feminist, deeply entrenched in the movement. It is who you are, not even just the movement, but it is who you are. This is your view of life. And then you have walking with you umkhulu who's deeply patriarchal. The istembu kind of, person. It's reminding me of, there's a book that I read, I forgot, umkhulu, she passed away actually, she wrote the book. Yes, I remember reading that book, and I remember there was a part in it where she was in conflict with umkhulu, saying that umkhulu liked women. She was lesbian. She didn't, the issue wasn't women, but older, and there was a particular one that she liked, and that always then made me wonder, like, to what extent then you can. This is not who you are, So I'm wondering then, as a feminist, and you find yourself with an umkhulu who's deeply patriarchal, womanizing. How do I don't know, and I don't know if this jumps into what happens ephelweni, in that how do you then extrapolate the good and become a healer with this person, and then leave behind their other worldly views and patriarchal tendencies?
So the thing about healing, first of all, is that it's not an arrived at destination. It's a constant process. Do you have the tools to continue to do the work of healing? And that's when you're okay. If you have the tools and you can call upon those tools. And the ideal is to reach a place of harmony, a place of balance. That balance being where these because, like, for example, traditional spirituality is less concerned about good and bad as it is about balance. How does the world dance with each other in a way that keeps everything blooming, So how do you heal umkhulu in a way where if he was responding out of sickness and playing, and that was how his sickness was playing out, you heal that, and then it is no longer an issue. Or if it does become an issue, you know how to address like the work towards that. And so I mean, because patriarchy affects all of us, right? It affects men and women alike. And so toxic behavior is often a trauma result or a result of something wounded. Ne? And so if we were to look at...
And the wound is not necessarily an incident.
Yeah. It can be intergenerational as well.
Yes. It can be a process of trauma.
Absolutely. So if the trauma plays itself out through toxic relationships with the opposite sex, then we need to get to the heart of the wound, heal that, so that we heal the relationship and how you relate to the opposite sex.
Wow. Okay.
Do you understand? Because the issue isn't that I'm living with umkhulu. The issue is that umkhulu is wounded. And mna xa ndithwasa ukuba kuphile mna, kuphile inzala, kuphile abantu abadala. So we need to heal umkhulu so that this isn't a problem that I'm carrying or that plays out in my child.
When you went through two different versions of Intwas, right? You first went through the traditional Xhosa way, and Ukabelawak was a woman, and then you went through Ubungoma, and your Kobela was a man. As a feminist, how did you experience these two processes as a feminist, and what kind of challenges did you face in each?
I am incredibly thankful in hindsight. In hindsight.
Always 2020.
Listen, after 7 years of Intwaso, of Uktwasa, like very kind of dedicatedly. Umama was crucial for me because I was learning myself as a young Xhosa woman. I was learning I didn't understand Xhosa, I didn't understand izinto zakwaXhosa, I didn't understand. I basically, because I come from this Model C background, had no cultural holding, you know. And she was able to teach me a lot of that, but also make me see some of the things that I definitely do not want to be moving forward with.
Okay. And you mean by this, you mean the experiences that you went through while going Ephelweni, which was situated in Makaya, deep in the rurals.
Eslalini in the Eastern
so
Cape.
you're talking specifically about those experiences. Yes.
Where I had to be like, oh, okay, but Intwaso is asking, what is it? What is being asked of me here? I am asking uba uphi embo, kwenzeka ntoni embo, sasinjani, why are we doing the things that we are doing so that we continue to be connected to the source? So if you tell me ukuba funeka sifunde intobeko, sonke funeka sifunde intobeko. So if you tell me that culture dictates that indoda ayizunika yona uba ithobeke, izawuba, you know, the head of the home. I'm not really sure how I'm going to navigate that. You know, so we butted heads a lot because because she's a Xhosa woman. But she understood where I was coming from because she always gave me room to search for what I was searching for. And also because she had that background of, I know what it's like to be silenced as a woman. And whatever we don't agree on, we can work it out, but I don't want you to be silenced. At the heart of it, umama thetha avukile. Noba intoni ndixelele. Noba andivumelani nawe ndixelele. You know? And because at the heart of it, she knew what the Black woman experience was, and I was new to it. There were ways in which she tried to shield me from it. Before walking into some negotiations or some situations, she would prepare me for it. And there were ways in which she was like, well, you know, you're not going to change the world, Ntanam. You know, because that's her reality. And so it helped me a lot in learning about which battles must I fight and which ones must I let go of. Because I can't fight everything. And she's like, just be aware that this is the situation. Uzazikhethela ke uzawuzama uyilwa. But usezawufuna kuyolwa napha ukhumbule. So uzawuthini?
Because I think a lot of what we call spirituality is intermingled with or intertwined with culture. And to an extent where we can't extrapolate one from the other. We don't know what is spiritual, one is actually what is culture.
Like, for example, xa uzawuhlatyelwa ibhokhwe kufuneka kubekho indoda. If amadoda wekho kokwenu, as was the case in many families,
or even if they are there and they are what men are today,
then sithini? And this was my constant question. And then umama would say, then uyahamba uyokhangela omnye umyirha noba uphuma kulaa ndlu. Uthi ucela uze uzohlaba.
So someone within your clan,
within
at
your
the very
clan,
least.
yes.
Yeah.
But you know what that does? As difficult as it is, it builds community. Because what it's saying is that your home is now a home without men, but it must be a home with men. And if you think that you are alone, know that you are not alone, because there are men over there. You are separated from the rest of your family. So how do we bring the family in and build community? And so this is how we rebuild Black families. We rebuild Black communities by saying the nuclear is not serving us, because here we are, nuclear and alone. But here is a wealth of extended family. We are not alone. And so that's what it teaches us.
Sure. I think what you're saying is intense in that it challenges what sometimes is misconceived as feminism, in that it is a way of life that does away or does not, cuts men out, and that this is for women and men can't be, but they shouldn't be a part of it. So this experience that you are describing in the way how it makes sense to you puts it in such a way that the process of drawing people in is actually empowering.
But the thing is, feminism for me is always about community. At the heart of feminism must be community.
Yes.
It must be, and also feminism for me is not about when and all that. I remember very distinctly when I first heard the word feminism feminist, and I was also just, I probably would have been called patriarchy princess.
Yes.
Now. But I was like, no, I'm not a feminist. I'm a female I believe in female consciousness.
Yes.
Because I was coming from the school of Black consciousness.
I can see the dreadlocks and the t-shirt.
The A-line skirts.
And the black lipstick. I can see it.
So I was like talking about female consciousness. But at the heart of it is I don't want a world of opposites. I don't want to create a society where we have toxic femininity in the place of where toxic masculinity now sits. We need to live in a society that is balanced, that is whole, that understands that the feminine must work with the masculine if we are to be whole, if we are to be healed. And I think maybe to connect it to your question around what going to Ubaba did for me.
Yes.
Because when I was told I was going to Ubaba, I distinctly, because inherently and very deeply inside myself, I could not fathom before I went to Ephehlweni the possibility of indoda being a true healer. There was not something I could believe could exist, because there is a level of humility that is required, and I hadn't seen it. Even Ephehlweni, like was Xhosa, where abakhwetha babafana, they didn't have to wash the dishes, or there were things that they got. I remember there's umntakwethu, he's a policeman, an older man, and we got into a big argument because I said, "Hayi ke tatumikha, ndicela mna undiphathele iti."
So you're basically asking a man to make you tea.
A grown police officer to make me tea.
Hey.
And I'm a young woman, but ndiligqirha. Ndinechoba wena usengumkhwetha. And xa undiphathela iti funeka uguqe phambi kwam.
Why did you do that?
Because I wanted to see if it exists.
So it was deliberate.
It was.
Okay.
It was a test, and he couldn't pass the test, but not because he tried, but because everything around him protected him from doing that. Mama were the first to be like, hi. And I was like, akondoda ephehlweni. Kukho abakhwetha. And that stayed with me. And so when I was told Banjizaya kubaba, I didn't believe it could happen. I packed on the day I was supposed to leave. I couldn't come to terms with it. Like I could not come to terms with it. And when I met Ubaba and we went to Madimatle, and there was a group of men that came, and then they all circled us, and we're like predominantly women, and then Bekubaba, and there was another young man. And this man came and stood right in front of me, and and bayacula, and I got so angry.
At their presence?
At their presence, at their audacity. Why are they circling us? And then I felt unsafe because, I'm thinking of this scene from a movie. You're not a man of God.
You're not a man of God.
Spiritual men rape people all the time. And there is nowhere that is sacred where I am safe as a woman, as a black woman. And so why is this happening? And why is everybody okay with this happening? So we go back to Ephehlweni, and I tell Ubaba that, and he's like, yeah, I could see you. And he says, uzawufumanisa ukuthi ibisihlwele sakho esibabizile ukubabaza.
So your guides deliberately called
yes.
they meant to put you through that experience.
Because I was shaking uncontrollably. I was like, I walk with a lot of women who have very similar experiences. And so part of my work is also healing that intergenerational trauma. And all of us were shaking. All of us were not happy. And I said to Ubaba, but I don't understand. And I was angry. And I was like, I don't understand why Abantu Abadala would put me through this. I don't even understand why they would bring me to you. And he said, and into buhlungu is that awuzuphuma apha without me. And I kept quiet.
It must be
And-
tips you over the edge for to be in that moment and the man says, you actually need me. Without me, you are not leaving this place. Because the reason you're angry is because you're feeling caged
exactly
by a man.
that. But the thing about it is that this is all said within the safety bracket of someone othobekileyo. Like ubaba, if uthetha nobaba, ubaba uyakwazi ukuguqa nawe, because andithi uguqile wena. Athethe nawe uguqe naye. Especially if uyeva ba kuthetha abantu abadala through you. It doesn't matter if your voice has changed or not, but he can sense uba kuthetha abantu abadala. Uzawuguqa athethe nawe. Ubaba uyakwazi ukuba akumamele. And really have deep compassion for the things you are going through. Because I went there to go and heal these intergenerational traumas, but also to heal my father wound.
Really?
I needed to know what it's like to have utata okumamelayo, okukhathalelayo, okubuzayo, and just genuinely cares about your well-being in a way that isn't lip service, but that is deeply present and future thinking. So ubaba says, myekeni alile. For good 3 weeks straight. If you walked past the street, you would hear this wailing woman. Like, no, but I'm being dead serious. My roommates would wake up and I'm sitting up and I'm crying silently, but tears are streaming down my face. Because I was crying for so many women. I was having terrible flashbacks. Not just my flashbacks of my own sexual trauma,
Like
but
spiritual flashbacks.
Yes. I saw how my grandmother had been sexually violated. And I was living through all of this all over again. My periods were a mess. My body was going through the most. And Ubaba knew how to respond to it in a way that wasn't trying to be embarrassed by it or hash it up or dismiss it in the way I've seen men respond to ways in which women speak of their trauma. You know, he understood what period pains meant in my body. So when he knows what I need to put in so that we can deal with what's happening in my body and in my spirit. And so I think going to Ubaba, it was definitely going to heal the masculine, to heal that man, the black man wound, but mostly the father wound.
If you can answer this, do you remember the moment throughout your, like you say, the first 3 weeks when you were basically in mourning? Do you remember the moment you realized that he represents that father figure, and when you realize that through him you can heal your father wound? Like, do you remember when you realized, wow, this is why I came here?
It was towards the end. As I was preparing for Indwasoyam, I started seeing and feeling my father more present, because my dad passed away 2008, and I had been struggling to communicate with him because of my own anger and also because of, I guess, his own journey of the things that he needed to heal. And something shifted and I started to feel him more. And I was sitting with Ubaba and I realized that I needed to know that there were examples of this in order to know that no tata wayenengulo yakhe, and he did his best egula enjalo. I just remember Nhlele Ndumbene, and I realized I came here because I didn't feel like I had a father, and now I do. Like I say Baba, and I really do genuinely feel like I have a father. And that has also made me love my father more and more empathetically, and with deeper compassion and forgiveness. Masculinity is what tools are at your disposal to allow for you to go out there and get what you need, to fetch things, and femininity would be what tools are at your disposal to call into your life the things you need, desire. So if we were to use lions as an example, and we think of them as the masculine and the feminine, everybody desires to eat. That's something we all need. The masculine is designed in a way that can give it strength, physical strength, to go and hunt. But that physical strength works in assistance, is better functioning in communal assistance, even if the one who scores the winning try is the masculine. Do you understand? So the women understand, the feminine understands that for the food to come to me, we must create an environment wherein the hunt is possible. We must set up the prey in such a way that the male can hunt, allow the male to eat, and then the male is stronger so that now it can bring more, and now we will all eat. And that's okay. And it comes to you. So there is something intuitive and patient and understanding that this energy is drawing in what I need. And the masculine is saying, I need to go out and get what I need. And in order to be a balanced human being, you need to be able to balance your masculine and the feminine. You must have enough physical and spiritual strength and power and tenacity to go out and fight for and go and physically fetch so that you can bring in the things that you need. But you must also have the wisdom and the intuition to know when to be still and to be quiet and to observe and to allow what is yours to come to you because it is yours.
After the Shaka Zulu TV show ended, Nomsaxaba, the actress who played Setai, the witch doctor, went on to star in yet another iconic TV production. It was a comedy called Kwakhala Nyonini, which was about a polygamist taxi owner who had multiple wives. Nomsaxaba played the village wife opposite the character of Beauty, who was played by Thembi Nyandeni. Now, Beauty was a city girl. She was nauseated by tradition. She was feisty, she was opinionated, she was intensely stubborn, and wouldn't be caught dead not looking like she had just walked off the runway of some Paris fashion show. I mean, Beauty wore high-waist pants and high heels in the middle of the rural villages of KZN. In many ways, Beauty was the very first black feminist to appear on South African television in the 80s. But despite such characters and many who came after, the portrayal of black women representing the dark side of spirituality persisted for decades. it became embedded in our collective psyche such that it became common sense that if you had to imagine someone practicing witchcraft, inevitably you would imagine a woman. It is much easier to believe that a woman uyatagata than it is to picture a man doing so. Yet, even with all the stigma and all of the stereotyping, it is women who have been at the forefront of the resurgence of interest in African spiritual belief systems that we are witnessing today. It is predominantly women who are submitting themselves to the call of their ancestors. It is primarily women who are becoming healers. It is also mostly women who are starting YouTube channels, hosting Instagram lives and Facebook pages, and even getting television shows that, for better or for worse, are keeping African spirituality in the spotlight. If I am being honest, I don't know what feminism can do within spirituality, but I guess feminism can only do what human beings allow it to do. It is, in its current form, a social movement like many others that came before it and many others that will come after. For me, this conversation has left me with one question in particular. If women, and black women specifically, are living under such oppressive and intersectional systems of economic disempowerment, systematic and cultural prejudice, and on top of that, brutal gender-based violence, what kind of ancestors do we expect them to become? My name is Vosomsen Rande. Thank you very much for joining me on yet another episode of The Journey Kwantu. I wish you light, I wish you courage, and I wish you all the very best on your journey. Makwande.